What's up everyone, this is Dariusz Kalbarczyk, co-founder of MG Poland, JS Poland, AngularMaster.dev and WorkshopFest.dev. Welcome back to the JavaScript Master Podcast. Today we've got a special guest from Slovakia, Replay DevRel, Cypress ambassador, instructor, speaker, trainer, ladies and gentlemen, Filip Hric. Hi Filip, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for inviting me.
So, for those who don't know you yet, please tell us about yourself.
So my name is Filip. I'm living in Slovakia with my family, my wife and my 4 kids. And during the day, I spend my time somewhere in between testing and developing. That's why I sort of created this tagline for myself. I teach testers about web development and developers about testing. That's where I'm at. So I write a blog, I do some videos, sometimes I do some live streaming, mostly about testing, mostly about Cypress. But now as the journey sort of progressed, I'm talking about more topics. Sometimes I talk about Playwright, sometimes I talk about Replay. In fact, I've been talking about Replay more and more because it's been like 5 weeks now that I am officially a DevRel at Replay. So I talk about debugging and flaky tests and stuff like that quite a lot these days.
How did your adventure in programming begin?
Oh, that's an interesting one. So originally, I don't really have a engineering degree. I actually graduated. I have a master's degree in psychology. So this is sort of my background. But I practiced psychology for like 2 years after school. I decided I'm not really ever going to be good at this. I didn't feel really comfortable. And I was really always a tech head. I really liked working with computers and buying gadgets and stuff like that. So I slowly progressed and learned a little bit about web, a little bit about how to build the site in WordPress, etc. And then slowly I gained the courage to try to apply for a tech job. And it happened to me. I was extremely lucky. I landed almost 8 years ago in a company called Slido. Maybe you know it. It's a Slovak company. It was a startup at the time that I joined. I think there were like 30 of us. Nowadays, I think there are over 200 employees in Slido. And in a year and a half ago or something like that, it was acquired by Cisco. So a huge success story from startup to getting it acquired. And the journey, of course, was crazy as well. So but there are a lot of stories there.
Can you explain what Test Replay is and how it works in Cypress version 13?
All right. So now you're asking about Test Replay, right? Because we have some naming similarities between the company I work at, which is Replay or Replay.io, and there's a feature called Test Replay, which is now in Cypress in version 13. So basically what Cypress did with Test Replay is they have brought the amazing experience you have with writing your test to the cloud service. So when you are writing your tests in Cypress, usually you open their interfaces like npx cypress open. You get this nice interface, you see the timeline of your commands where you can travel back in time, see all the API requests and everything. And as you hover or click on something, you can just go back and forward wherever you need, like as your test was executing. So that's really good. It's really great if you want to find a selector, select an element that just appears and disappears. Examine what's happening in your application as your test is running. That has been like the great thing about Cypress, the UI that it provides you. What Cypress has been working on for past couple of months is test replay and bringing this experience into the cloud. Now, it's not one-to-one, of course, because you will not be able to write your tests in cloud, but you will be able to debug them. So many of us probably experienced when writing end-to-end tests and especially running them, that there is a difference between when you run it locally and when you try to run it on CI. Now, of course, running them on CI, that's the important part, right? Because usually they're connected to a pipeline. If that's not green, you're not able to release, or there's some investigation or something needs to be done. So that was always kind of annoying about Cypress, and now they have improved that experience a lot because you get much more insight from your CI. Previously, you only had like video and screenshots, and now you have a video, but also you have a timeline and a like series of snapshots to see what your application was doing as the test progressed. So it's a really, really nice experience. And they bring it basically in the same package as the Cypress cloud service that they have been selling. So just maybe to clear out some confusion, Cypress is an open source project, but of course they have a paid service which you can have and improve your experience with Cypress.
What challenges do developers and testers typically face when debugging their tests?
It's always test flakiness. That's sort of a term we are using for any kind of tests instability, right? And especially test flakiness, which you like cannot really decipher what's going on. And I think that's the hard part, right? So the debugging experience is going to depend heavily on what tools we have, right? So everyone tried to debug a program using like a console log, right? Try to see what this program is actually doing. And what you end up doing is adding a console log, running your application, adding another one, running your application. Try to decipher what's going on. Now, you don't have this option in CI, right? So what you can only rely on, for example, like in Cypress's test replay solution, now you have DOM snapshots, so you can actually see what's going on as your test is executing. So that improves it a lot, actually. I don't want to downplay that. That's a huge improvement. But there is one thing that I feel is kind of a missing part, and that's why I got so excited when I was first exploring replay, and that's the fact that when you examine your snapshots or error messages or videos or screenshots, you only get the part that of your test. So you're working simply with just the test code and what the test was doing against the application. But you don't really get too much insight into what your application is doing. And that's kind of a problem because most of the flakiness that happens during your tests is because of how we build applications today, right? We have different asynchronous API calls and asynchronous functions, and sometimes we would like to have them work in a certain order. Now, if you're using your application like a normal person would, you would never find the problem, like the timing issue of two asynchronous asynchronous functions not triggering in the right order. But this is not the case with our tests, because of course what they do is they run extremely fast. And we want them to run really fast because we need a really fast feedback and be able to tell if we can ship the application. And then if we don't get that, we get the added burden of having to go to debugging, taking a lot of our time. And I think like the biggest problem with debugging is that it takes too long of a time, right? We talk about performance of different test tools and which is faster and how fast the CI runs, etc. But the actually most important and most expensive time is the time we as humans spend on debugging. So that's kind of a problem, not only for you and the fact that you get bored by constant debugging, but also for the company, right? They're paying you to solve problems. It's not going to happen if you spend a couple of days just trying to fix a flaky test or a flaky bug. So I think that's sort of quite a long way to get to the final answer. But that's what I consider being the biggest problem of debugging. It's just that it's so expensive.
How can debugging tools like Test Replay and Replay.io improve the debugging experience?
The short answer would be by providing you a insight, right? That's what these tools try to do. The Test Replay from Cypress is trying to give you more eyes, more information on what the test was doing as it was executing. Replay.io is trying to do that as well. But the killer thing that Replay.io is doing is that it will not only provide you with the test code, it will provide you with the source code as well. So what you can do, you can dive into the source code and debug your application. And what I mean by that is, for example, when your application calls a function, in Cypress or Playwright, you wouldn't be able to look into that function and see what it was returning. Not unless you added a console log before you ran those tests. But with Replay.io, what you can do, when you run your tests with Replay.io, you will get a recording with your source code, and you can take a look into that function and see what it was, which arguments went into that function, what the function has returned. And if it was called multiple times, you can see that in the timeline with all this information. And there are a lot of other tools in Replay, but that's basically the gist of it, of how you might use it as a first-time user.
Can you elaborate on the importance of gathering insights through debugging in software development and testing?
Yeah, I may back up a little bit and try to explain what Replay.io is, because I already said that you can run your tests with Replay.io, but what I mean by that is not like in traditional way that it is a test runner. The way I like to explain what Replay is that it's actually three things in one. So it's a browser, it's a recorder, and it's a DevTools debugger. So as a browser, it's something that's built for testers and developers. So it's not like you go to Twitter or Facebook with that browser. It's specifically for your testing and developing needs. And it's a recorder. So it has a spatial capability, this browser. It can record your application, right? So as you interact with the application you are developing or trying to test, you will create a recording. So you'll hit the record button, replicate your bug or something like that, and then stop, and then you get that recording. Now, this recording is then used inside the DevTools debugger, right? So in those DevTools debugger, you can do exactly the stuff that I mentioned, right? You can jump into the code, you can examine different functions, different React components. If your application has like a Redux state, you can actually see the Redux state changing and seeing what's happening inside as you went through the application. So you're going to work with that recording, and similarly to like when you would be working in your VS Code, right? You add a console log into your code and then run it. With Replay, the order is kind of reversed because you have your recording already. It contains everything. It contains your code, your API calls, all the data that went in through the timeline, and then you can add a console log into that. So you can sort of see what was happening, and you can add as many console log as you need. I call them console logs, but they're like really like print statements, which is kind of the same, but maybe someone watching this or listening might be confused by all the console logs I'm using. But basically, that's the power of replay. Yeah. Recently I asked on LinkedIn. I created a poll and I was asking testers and test automation engineers what constitutes like a bigger part of your day. Is it writing tests or debugging tests? And it was, I believe, 61% said that debugging test is the bigger portion of a day. And I haven't done this poll, but I think it would be very similar if I asked developers whether they spend more time creating the code or debugging the code. And debugging is not going anywhere, right? We will always be doing it. There's a joke that if you have 10 lines of code, you'll probably have like $20 already. And it's basically part of the developing process. So the importance of debugging is that we need to make sure that we are debugging effectively. And what we are doing when we are debugging, essentially, if you just like take a high level look into what you are doing as a person, you are getting more insight. You are getting more understanding of your application, of what your application is doing. So I think we could say that debugging is learning. And I think we can all agree that learning is important. And being able to learn fast, being able to learn effectively is important. And I think the same goes for debugging. Debug fast, debug effectively, and gain some insight. Know the code that you have written, examine it, get to understand it. That's what I think is really important.
So what are the limitations of traditional debugging tools, and how does Replay.io address them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's one of the reasons why Replay.io even exists. The biggest challenge is sort of this bugs or issues or problems that don't occur always, right? So if there are any QAs and testers, they probably know this story, right? You create a great scenario, you finally found the bug that you have experienced, right? You found it, you know the exact steps, now you can replicate it, right? And you send that over to your developer and they will say, oh, I could not replicate it, sorry. I'll put it in the backlog, see what happens next time. And that's the problem, right? So it like the good old works on my machine, right? So what the Replay.io does is like when you capture your bug, when you capture it, you can actually do that manually, because I've been mentioning like test automation flakiness. You can do that, and that's like huge, and we can talk about that more. But you can actually do that manually. You can open the Replay browser, record the steps, record the interaction that you have, catch the bug, and then send that recording over to your developer. And they're not going to complain about that they cannot reproduce the steps, because those steps are reproduced in that recording. And what they have actually is the whole source code. So they can look at it the same way they will look at it when they would be developing locally. So there's a big challenge with bugs like these, the issues like this, that we just like cannot replicate, we cannot find. And Replay.io solves that, because instead of trying to create a reproducible example, you have reproduced recording, which sort of gives you all the tools that you need. Because as I mentioned, it's 3 tools in one. The third one, the most important one, is the DevTools debugger. So you have your DevTools, you can debug, you can take a look into anything, and then as a developer, take the proper action in fixing that.
How do you envision the role of debugging evolving in the testing landscape in the coming years?
That's a great question. Beginning of this year, I had a keynote on a topic that was test like a developer, develop like a tester. And it's been sort of this talk like showing two different worlds and show how testers and developers are sometimes kind of friends and enemies, like frenemies or something like that, and how it shouldn't be like this, how we should learn from one another, cooperate, because it's important and our jobs are actually more connected than we usually think, or than we sometimes think. I mean, kudos to all of the companies that have testers and developers working together. I personally think that's like the only sensible way, but I see many companies having testers and developers even in like different buildings. Not to say like have your tests inside the source code repository. That's like a crazy idea for some people, which I don't think it should be. So debugging, when it comes to this, I think it's really good if you have a tight feedback loop between testing and developing. And testers have been working on their test automation. And sometimes what happens is that your test gets flaky, right? And we call it a flaky test, but it's really not a very good term, because what actually might be flaky is either the application or the server we are testing on, right? Ever tested on a staging server that has like 1/10 of the performance of the production? Those are like real problems that testers have to deal with. And sometimes what I think might be really beneficial is to get developers in the loop and get them interested in testing. And what that will essentially bring is to try to debug those problems and write not only more stable tests, but also stable apps. So again, another poll that I did recently on LinkedIn, I was asking theoretical question, right? If your application and your server, if those would be totally flake-free, right? Stable as a rock, what would happen to your end-to-end tests? An overwhelming majority, I think it was like 73% or something like that, would say, oh, the test would get more stable. And it's funny because when we are dealing with test flakiness, we are talking about test and we're trying to change the test, but sometimes what we really need to do is to change the application, right? Because as I mentioned, end-to-end test usually goes really, really fast, and it sort of unveils all of the underlying problems that the application has that we maybe on our M1 machines don't encounter, but our user using an old Windows 98 machine or something like that might very, very well experience. So I think debugging should be an important process, and I see it as more and more important in the future when we want to write stable tests and be able to have a good confidence in and good cooperation between the end-to-end test suite and the application, and also testers and developers. So I hope that answers your question, because again, I kind of went on a detour because there are a lot of thoughts that are accompanied with this question. So that's why I went sort of off rails a little bit.
Definitely. So if we talk about future, can you explain the concept of time traveling with Replay.io?
Of time traveling. I think I kind of already touched on that, right? We have these different time machines already that are in our testing frameworks, right? So Cypress, as I mentioned, they have their timeline, and when you run your test, you can travel back in time to each and every step and see what the state of your application was at that moment. Playwright has something similar. They have brought a trace viewer. So as your test is running, it will generate a a trace which you can then view and again like go back in time, see what was happening with your application or with your test at a certain point of time. Replay.io is kind of the same concept. It also allows you to travel back in time, but the principle is slightly different because it doesn't really record like only the DOM snapshots, like the HTML and CSS of your page and maybe like the network communication, but it will capture like the whole source code. So as a browser sort of loads your application, it will download the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and everything. Replay will record all that. It will map it to your source maps, and it will record not only like the static assets that your browser downloads, but it will also like capture the data layer. So as the data flows through your different functions and different states, it will capture also that. So again, you can time travel, but you can also time travel to the data layer, and this is all this like even Cypress, Playwright, but also Replay. This ability to go back in time and try to see what was actually happening with our software as we were interacting with it, or as our test was interacting with it, is really powerful. It's something that we need. We don't. If we're talking about end-to-end tests, we're never really satisfied with just like the test has passed or the test had an error. We need some more context. So that context is brought by these time machines.
So the last technical question, can you explain how this workflow look like?
I mean, there are many different setups of how you can have your teams set up. I was fortunate enough to have a well-functioning team in my previous job at Slido, where testers and developers would like work together, sit together. We would have like feature teams where a team worked as a unit and could deliver a whole feature. So that team would have a backend developer, front-end developer, tester, designer, product owner. Basically, everyone needed to deliver a certain feature. Now, I know this is not always reality. Sometimes you might have a bigger split between these teams. So sometimes you have like a development department and then you have testing department. And usually, basically, developer develops, throws it over the fence, and then testers tests and throw it back when it doesn't work. So this, I think, is not ideal, but if they are like at least in the same building or somehow connected, have a good communication, it can work. And it, of course it works, but I think the feedback loop between like writing the code and validating whether that code was written well and according to all acceptance criteria, that's going to be longer. And the more distance is there between testers and developers, the longer the feedback loop will be. And with some companies, that's okay because they release once a month or once a year or something like that. So the process is kind of different. If you want to do like continuous integration and deliver constantly, like continuous delivery, then this setup is not going to be ideal. And then we can go like to complete extremes where you have a QA that's outsourced and developers that are outsourced as well, and business just does the business. And I think, it can work in some setups, but again, it's going to bring in some hurdles. And I have an opinion that they should be very close together, testers and developers. And my argument is that if you're a developer and you write your code, and then, for example, if you're a web developer, you open your browser, you run the code, you didn't suddenly turn into a tester, right? When you want to like see the code and see what you have done, you didn't turn into a tester, you're still developer. And I think we should call testers developers because they're part of that development process, right? If we want to include testing into development, then testing is development. So So yeah, that's what I think, and that's what I think that most companies should aim for. Have a tight feedback loop between these two entities, because they're the same actually.
What kind of person is Filip? How do you see yourself?
I'm the kind of person that tries his best. I sometimes lose my temper. I'm a person that is really fueled by a compliment for my work. So whenever I get a compliment that you did this good or you did that well, that's my fuel. That's what I that's what I strive on. I am a person that doesn't always say what he thinks the way it should be said. What else am I? I am a lot of things. Now, I mentioned I studied psychology, so I got to do a lot of digging inside of myself. So, not sure how much time you have, because this can go for a for a long time.
Do you have some hints for us regarding self-organization?
Self-organization, like your personal planning or self-discipline or stuff like that. That's interesting. I am a big admirer of GTD, getting things done method. I had a very good experience on a seminar that I attended that explained this method. And basically, right now, if I don't have something in my to-do list, I'm not able to do it. And that's what I'm relying on. And another thing that I'm relying on is weekly plannings. So I mentioned I have 4 kids. It's a big family, and it requires some organization. It requires to have have certain rituals, have certain rhythm. It's hard to do that in such a big family, but it is really important. So if you want to get really organized, have a big family. It's going to force you into being really well organized, because otherwise it's utter chaos, and that's not what you want.
So what about your work-life balance?
My work-life balance, I'm really fortunate to have a work that is really fulfilling, that I really enjoy, that is fun. So most of the time, working on something doesn't feel like work. I think what I really need to do is to have a screen and non-screen balance. That's what I'm trying to work on. So I'm really passionate about running. I ran my second marathon a couple of weeks ago. That's what I try to do, like get my body moving, because I can sit for crazy amounts of time just like solving a problem and doing stuff like that. So I need to force myself and to get that balance. Of course, my family needs me, so it's really good to have someone to sort of tear you out of your desk and focus on them instead. So I think a lot of work-life balance sort of solves itself for me. So I don't really have to think about as if it's 5 o'clock, I need to finish because my family needs me. That makes things a little bit easier in terms of like organizing my day and finding the balance.
Last question. Book you would recommend to our listeners?
Book I would recommend. There are so many. I'm thinking about like which one would be the best. I actually have several books that have really helped me. One of the books is called Switch by Dan Heath, I believe was the name. But it's a book about change. about building a habit, building a change. So that change can be anything: change in society, change in your personal life. And it was a really, really good one, and it helped me a lot to understand how to change things either in my life or somewhere else. And another great one, which, well, when we are talking about work, one that really, really helped me was A Radical Candor by Kim Scott, I believe was the name. I listened to it as an audiobook, and as soon as I finished, I hit replay. I basically decided to listen to it once more. So that's a really great book if you are if you had a career growth and suddenly you are leading a team. That was something that happened to me. I didn't lead anything besides a music band before I was QA lead at Slido, and it was really useful to understand what a good boss needs to do and how he or she should perform their job. So that's really helpful. That's what I recommend to anyone who finds themselves in a managerial position.
Amazing. Filip, thank you so much for today's podcast. It was an honor to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun. You asked really interesting questions. So thanks for this interview. I enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you so much.